Ladies and gentlemen, the tiny DevOps guy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Tiny DevOps Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hall. Today, we're talking about observability and some stories from the field about implementing observability. I'm excited to have Paul Cothenet. Welcome. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do professionally, and then we'll start.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the last name is French, in case you're wondering. Like probably no doubts after hearing me talk. But I've lived in the US for the past 13 years. I'm currently a staff software engineer at a company called Patch in the climate tech space. Before that, I had been a founder for 7 years at a company called Kudu. And yeah, that's about it.
Very cool. So I reached out on the RAND's leadership Slack for people who had experience with doing observability in small companies, and you responded. And you said you've done this at two different companies. How do you want to tackle this? Do you want to talk about chronologically the first one first, or is that the best way to go?
Yeah, I can probably tell you a little bit more about the context. So and for context for everyone. So I started my own company around 2014. So it was like two co-founders and myself, and I was the main like technical co-founders. But the fun fact about it is I learned how to code kind of on the spot, and I learned like DevOps. So I was a product manager before, so I was not completely out of the field, but I had not done any DevOps of any kind by myself before. And in fact, the first company I worked at was a PM, started 2011, and it was still all on premise. So it was first experience coding, first experience DevOps, first experience cloud at all whatsoever. So I essentially like figured things out on my own for like a couple of years before I was even able to hire a couple people to help me. And in that current job, it's more like, okay, now I've had like 7 years experience doing this. It was more a little bit more like, what have I learned, and set it up like for best practices. Got a lot faster the second time around, I have to say.
Good. That's great. So we can learn hopefully from your experience there. Well, let's start with the first one then. What kind of company was it? What were you selling or doing?
Yeah. So it's actually the company is still running. So I
Okay.
hope I don't say anything stupid. Still very good friends with the folks there. So
Mm-hmm.
but we were doing essentially machine learning for sales. So it is analyzing a bunch of marketing data, event analytics. Connecting to Salesforce, essentially replicating all of that inside our own data warehouse, and then running machine learning algorithms on top of it. So something that was quite data engineering heavy, probably be called AI in 2022. It wasn't in 2015, but relatively like data heavy with a lot of processing, batches, real time, and all of that stuff, right? So that was kind of like if you want to think about the architecture at a high level, it's like ingest data from external sources, massage it into one place, and then at the very end, you want to send it back into Salesforce so that people who use Salesforce can see the intelligence there essentially.
What prompted you to start the journey into observability at this company? Why did you feel the need?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like more, I started QA, I believe it was around like 16, 17, like seeing a couple demos of folks like starting to talk about what they're doing with like New Relic or Datadog and being like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. I was definitely on like a full AWS stack. So I had a couple of those things and like CloudWatch metrics and I have a lot of respect for a lot of what AWS does. CloudWatch, I don't think I've heard anyone saying it's their favorite observability platform whatsoever, right? And so I think even like because of that, like you don't even know what you don't know. And it's like, oh, that's all I can do. I can have those like crappy logs somewhere and metrics that I can't really, and it just never clicked, I think, with that interface and those tools that I could create my own metrics or have a way to like really look at it or like centralize everything. And so seeing like a demo, I think at the time of like Datadog, I believe it was Segment who was like showing what they were doing with it, and I was like just like blown away. I was like, oh, that's the level of that's the level of visibility I can have in my system. I should absolutely try this, right? The main driver, I would say, or the main thing that counted for us was more, you know, with those out of the box tools, you get decent data if you know where to look at about, the basic metrics, right? So, you can find like if you have a memory problem or a CPU problem, you can sort of look into it. What really clicked for me at the time was actually looking into like getting into custom metrics, right? So essentially like stats D type stuff. And the driver was because we had those data pipelines were a lot of, a thing that our customers cared a lot, or like we realized that our customers cared a lot. It's like, okay, I create new lead in Salesforce, and what I care about, the SLA I care about essentially is making sure that they are scored within a certain time, right? And realize that essentially it was one of those things like if you look at all the existing tools you have, there's nothing in the out of the box, observability that will tell you that, right? It's a metric that's very specific to what your product is doing, that is not like, essentially latency, CPU, or memory. And so it's like, oh, how do we do something that can easily measure that, that SLO, like that what's been known to be called SLO, and how do we keep track of it, and how do we get alerted about it, right? And so it really started with like essentially having a little cron job that was measuring like the fill, what we call the fill rate, essentially sending it to Datadog, and then that was actually kind of magical because like out of the box we now had a SLO, and we could do like graphs and alerts in Pager when something went wrong, which completely flipped the game for us, where from, the customer telling us first that something was wrong to us being able to be notified way before that, right? So it's kind of like that ability to track really the metric we cared about rather than what came out of the box. That was a game changer at the time.
So you started with sort of you were on AWS, so just kind of whatever tools came automatically
Right.
is
Right.
basically what you were using at first, right?
Yeah. And remember, I was like a one person, both developer and DevOps. So it's kind of like, like it's always like, this field where you're like, oh, you don't even know what you don't know in terms of what's possible to track. But what became super interesting then after, and I guess, that's the more applicable, I guess, learnings for observability was really great there. As like really for us was like this ability of just like tag everything, right? And you have like for me like the big revelation there was when you can see like, oh, I can have the logs, I can have the match, then so that's how it started essentially with like those stats metrics. But then I pulled the thread on what was possible in the field, and you can like I guess the marketing of those things have come to call this like the three pillars or whatever. Couldn't tell you which. It's probably logs, metrics, and traces. I don't know. The marketing may have changed since I last looked at it, but it was kind of like pulling that thread and realizing that, oh, like it was kind of magical, like realizing that you can have like all those three things in one place that all like self-reference each other, right? So when you can get to the point where it's like, to take my example, like something's wrong with that customer. Okay, I can immediately figure out where, on what machine was the thing happening, and then you can pull and figure out which logs were exactly on the same machine, or like track the log to the trace. And I think that to me was the moment that really clicked, with observability. Is like, oh, like compared to what I was doing before, like having like everything in one place with like cross-referencing tags and things, it just makes you so much faster to debug anything, right? Essentially, because you can really like find that rope and just pull that thread and like really figure out everything in one place.
So I think I like that the three pillars are fuzzy in your mind, because that gives me a chance to ask a question that I can't ask everybody, and that is, what is observability to you? Because you're not going to give me the buzzword answer. You're going to have to tell me what you actually think.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think like if I think about it now, I think it's both like when I think about like what immediately comes to mind is every it's like essentially like everything I need to debug something when something goes wrong is one aspect of it. But I'm also realizing that over the years I've also starting to use it like more proactively, which is kind of like yeah how do I know everything's going right where if nothing's firing and use that to like show it across the team and across the company as like, hey, look, I have all those latency metrics that you didn't even ask for and I can so that's actually a great question. I was like, I'm thinking in my head, it's almost like observability. It's almost like I want to measure and track things that I may need later to look into either a problem or something good, but to really to really understand what's going on without my system. I think before I really got into that world, it was kind of like, okay, we had a problem, and we'll literally have like we'll implement logging for the next time around, right? And I think like what's been really upset for me is like, oh, I already have the data to look into what happened rather than oh, maybe next time we'll know about it because we designed this thing, right? So I think for I don't know if that's a good definition, but essentially like being able to know like after the fact what was going on in my system without having to like re-implement anything has been pretty key.
So you started with AWS, didn't like it. You mentioned Datadog, and I think you mentioned a few others. What did you settle on at this company, or was it a collection of different tools?
Yeah, I had started with New Relic because like at the time, so again, it was like 2015, 2016, they were like the main APM game in town. And it was a magical experience at first, like getting that APM, right? Because again, like going back to that thing, I was like, oh, I wish it measured things I don't even think I will need later. It's like kind of, you know, especially it was a pretty basic like or basic it was a the main application like without all the data stuff was a node.js express thing, right? And I remember that thing. I was like, oh, it's like 2 lines of code and you get all the metrics about things that it would have taken you days to even think of like where to track it or to marquee patch your application to like track some of those metrics. So that experience was pretty magical. I have to say that and it may have changed again. It's like 2016. Like wasn't like New Relic's pricing was like really brutal when it came to like scaling that at the time, and I never really dug into like the user interface. So again, like a friend of mine like then showed me what they were doing with Datadog, and I was like, okay, that's cool, but they don't have the APM yet. And I think as soon as they launched the Node.js APM, I was like, oh, this will be nice because like your logging product looks great. Your metrics, I was a user of the metrics product, and so when they launched APM and logs, I was like, okay, like that is cool because I'll have everything in one place, right? I think before that, I can't remember what I was using for centralized logs, but it wasn't New Relic. So I had the logs in one place, the APM in another. That was cool, and I was starting to dabble with metrics. And I think the moment where all of them like collapsed together and like in one place in Datadog, and in that case I was like, okay, this is exactly what I need. I'm just going to get everything in one place.
So you had APM, you had logs. I'm assuming you had alerts when things reach certain thresholds,
Yeah,
if they
yeah,
broke or
yeah.
whatever.
Some basic things. It was like, oh, if the app stops responding, like please let me know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how many were at the company when you started this journey? Did you say one or two in engineering? I guess is what I care about.
There's probably 2 people in engineering, but really one in
Uh,
DevOps and infrastructure, like myself,
okay,
essentially.
yeah, okay. Any challenges you faced while you were doing this?
Yeah, I mean the it's kind of interesting. Maybe I can tie it to what I'm doing. What my more recent experience there is like. I think it's like one challenge is honestly like it's really easy to set up like these days. Like I can say like I can't think like when I had to reset a couple things like the I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it was kind of like I think one challenge with those tools is like scripting in the UI, where you end up doing a lot of things manually, like monitors and stuff that are like, you go in the interface. So in that second go around, I've tried to set up as many of those things as possible in Terraform so that monitoring is scripted, is like infrastructure as code. It's not always lives up to what you want to do. I have to say, it's like there's actually a Datadog Terraform provider, which is pretty cool, which essentially lets you script as code some of the monitors, some of the. I think you can do dashboards. It lets you like literally like write and use version control for some of this stuff. It's really cool. But one trap I think with some of it, all of those tools is really like one off. You do it one off in the UI, you create an alert, and then you don't know what's happening to it. You don't know if it's been deleted by someone. So we can go back over that a little bit, which I think is a challenge with some of like graphical user interface. Honestly, one challenge I faced at my current company at Patch, or it's not really a challenge, but it's like it's getting adoption, right? I know that those tools are there. I know how to use them, and when someone starts at the company, they might not even know that you can monitor that or that you can create like a new monitor. Like I love creating a new monitor. Like at the time I release a product, right? It's almost like I had tracking. I make sure everything is there in one place. But I've realized that a lot of other software engineers on the team may not even know those tools exist or they're there, right? So I have almost like when you're on board, how do I tell people about it? How do you like, hey, have you thought about, like people ask you like, oh, well, how do I check my release? And it's like, oh, like, do a quick phone call and show them like, oh, this is how I would like create a dashboard, like maybe measure this, maybe add a statsd metric. I love doing statsd metrics when you have feature branches. You can see how many calls go into each branch. But I've realized that the overall education, I think, hasn't completely reached everyone in the field, right? So you still have like some people with more DevOps experience know that they can use this, and maybe like a chunk of developers have still no idea that those tools exist, right? So a big part of my job, I feel like, is educating and showing what I've been doing and what you can do. But like, it's teaching people how to fish, like problem, right? I don't want to be the bottleneck on like every release. It's like, let me set up observability, right? But like getting that full ownership to the rest of the team is still a little bit of a challenge.
How do you approach that challenge? How do you teach the other developers and engineers what tools are there and the mindset to use them?
Yeah, I wish I had a standardized. I wish I had a standardized answer there. I think what I would say is I try to be as demonstrative as I can, right? So it's kind of like, hey, like when I release my own feature, or my team release their own feature, it's almost like every time, you do the announcement and like, here's the dashboard that we're gonna use to like measure it and be like really demonstrative, right? I think it's like rules, like you don't want those tools like flips, you don't want those tools to be only like people with DevOps experience feel like they can use them, right? I want everyone on the team to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna release this feature. I'm not sure I'm gonna see if it's working. Like I want that to be as democratic as possible, right? So I want like two things: like one, show they exist, and then once people know them, it's like almost like someone does a release and they ask you questions like, oh, let me show you, right? So I do a lot of like on the fly, on the fly demo and just try to say, oh, like, hey, look at like in 5 minutes you can create this dashboard that will essentially show you the health of the release of your new feature, like so that it almost becomes it's muscle memory, right? It's like you should do this as you release, but it takes a little bit of time. It's definitely like a step in the onboarding. It's like giving access to everyone, maybe doing a demo. I know I have an old video that I probably need to re-record because it's a bit old, of like onboarding video of like 25 minutes. So it's like, here's what you can do, here's what we track, here's how you use it. So probably should refresh that. But it's one of those things that I think it takes a little bit of time and process to get right, but it really, like, if you get it right, it really pays off in nice ways in my experience, right?
Let's move on to the second company where you did this. Talk about them, and then we'll come back and ask some more general questions. But yeah, tell us what were they selling? What were they like? What was their situation, and how did that go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next company, which is my current one, is called Patch. We are what we call like the infrastructure for the sustainable economy. So we offer actually tool for the carbon removal industry. So we are trying to help with the carbon dioxide removal field, which is like very ambitious, very ambitious vision. In practice, I joined that 10 company when it was 10 people. It was essentially a marketplace web app to buy carbon removal and an API to the same. So a slightly less complex operationally product. You know, it's a Ruby on Rails monolith with a couple background jobs. There's a lot of complexity in domain modeling, but not as much so far in DevOps, right? So it's kind of you know, couple pods running, a Rails application, and a couple pods that run background jobs, right? So nothing as complicated as the data pipelines that I had last time around. But I also found myself in the same situation where I think the engineer that had set up that infrastructure left like 2 weeks after I joined. And so I had to like crash course, essentially replace and like, okay, you own the infrastructure now. And so definitely my first reflex was like, okay, like do I understand, you know, I think with all like that, you know, 5 years of experience, like working with observability, my first reflex was like, okay, where's my data, right? Where can I see if something goes wrong? Where can I see like, the elf of what's going on, and if something goes wrong, where do I look at, right? So it was definitely one of my first reflexes. Probably was in the first like 1 or 2 months was, okay, can I get Datadog on there? And like we talked to the CEO. I had a little bit of a pitch to do because initially you're like, oh, like, you know, can't we get that with like AWS tooling? And I'm like, trust me, it's not as good. Uh, so I remember doing a pitch, and it was a pretty short pitch. But I think I did that like within my first month. Was essentially let's get the logs in one place. Let's get the metrics of the infrastructure. And it was almost like you know, first 90 day first 90-day task is like, where are we at? Can we get something as good as what I had before? There were some challenges, like because there was a Kubernetes infrastructure which I was not familiar with at the time, so it's also I was also you know, bootstrapping my own knowledge of Kubernetes at at the same time.
And that's always its own challenge. I love Kubernetes, but it took a little while.
Side note, I'm not sure that this company needed Kubernetes at the time. I'm
Right.
glad we have it now, but it was one of those things. I was like, oh, it seems a little. But that was actually a good. I think having visibility into that let me understand it a lot faster, right? As like as a you know, I love like most observability tools those days like will give you like a, you know, like some visualization of like the different servers you have and everything you have running, and it's actually a really good way to like understand even what your system looks like, right? It's like it's a lot more visual if you can see everything on one screen. So that was definitely like a 1 month. So yeah, different, very different experience there in the sense that I feel like the first company was like probably 3 years of me even understanding what I needed to have or what I, you know, what existed and how to use it. Versus this one, I was like, okay, now I know how useful this has been for me in the past. Like it's almost like first thing I'm doing is getting observability done properly, and then as I mentioned, it's been a lot more about like showing people how to use it. And like as we expanded the size of the team, I was like, okay, I'll do, you know, I'll do everyone know how to use those tools and can make the most of it. So that's been, you know, it's been almost like one like, yeah, like 3 years to learn everything and then a month to like replicate it the second time around, which was nice.
How did the pitch go when you were trying to convince the CEO that you needed something better than AWS? Because I can imagine a lot of our listeners might be in that situation. You know, like they know that they need something better, but how do they convince management?
I mean, it was interesting as well because I was just coming in, right? So I think that the CEO initially was like, I put like a little task to discuss with him. I was like, I don't think we need this, a curt answer. I don't think we need this right now. I was like, you just come in the new company, you're like, oh crap, you've never argued with someone. So for me, it was also a part of like, a part of like learning, is that I realized there was a very like strong opinion weekly held scenario, so I was able to convince him pretty easily. But I could probably pull that document out. I might, leave a. We might still have it somewhere. I'll see if I find it for like the reading notes. But that's a great question. What did I say? I said I think my pitch was around like it just makes me a lot faster debugging when something goes wrong by having everything in one place. Was kind of the pitch. I also, if I remember well, I think I spent a lot of time. Like I was familiar with the cost structure, and I think it was helpful to explain like how much it would cost, and sort of like how that would scale, which you know we can expand into that is not necessarily always easy. Like the pricing, the pricing of all-in-one observability platform tends to have a lot of tentacles and a lot of variability. So, but having an idea of like, hey, this is worth like, this is gonna cost us like $300 a month and gonna make me a lot more productive, just like knowing what's going on. I was a little bit, lucky enough, to be like, there's a little bit of like pulling the muscle of like, pulling the string of like, hey, trust me, I've done this before. But I think that I'm joking there, but I think that had some weight, right? It's like this is a tool I've used like for 5 years, and it saved my life like countless amount of time. Um, I'm lucky enough to have a CEO that is a former software engineer that knows how to trust the senior people he hires, which is great to have. If you don't have, if you're listening to this and you don't have that, I don't know how to solve this.
Yeah. Okay.
But having some visibility on the cost and benefit, it's always like in the end, it's like your CEO cares. It's like, is this gonna make me more money or save me money or like make my people faster? We could go into that like longer. Like I'd be super interested, Gabe, on your podcast. But one thing I've tried to do at this company is to keep DevOps small, and that was a little bit of an argument, right? It's like that. I, you know, like that shift left, it's after the fact. That's not the pitch I've made, but it's almost like, like we do like shift left on security, like shift left on observability. I feel like it's probably something you want to do because like, honestly, I didn't want to, we still don't have a full like DevOps or infrastructure person. Like the team is 8 people today. And I feel like that was the right decision. Like you don't want to, like if you can have everyone on the team do a little bit of it and know how to do it, it probably delays when you'll bring that full-time person on. And so, if I had to redo that argument, I'll be like, hey, it's also a way to like have everyone know what's going on rather than have those silos of like, oh, there's one infrastructure person that really knows what the hell's going on and everyone else is clueless. So it's probably a good argument there if you think about like the business argument to management. It's like, well, so actually let us hire less people over time, and that that can be a big argument.
What would you miss the most if you couldn't use? I guess we'll say Datadog. I mean, whatever tool you're using, I think it's Datadog. If you couldn't use Datadog tomorrow, if it was gone, what would you miss the most?
I think it's that correlation of every tool. It's the fact that I can jump from like a log to a trace to a metric with like some things like, I know my way into CloudWatch. I can find something. The search is pretty horrible, right? So I would miss the search. I would miss the search. I'm sure like you can do a lot of things with like CloudWatch monitors and logs and things, but honestly, that speed of being able to go through the interface. I've seen some demos of Honeycomb, which seems to be doing really well there as well. It's like the speed of being able to jump from one thing to the other. I haven't been able to replace that with the AWS native tooling, right? The information is there, but almost the amount of brain cognition it takes you to like to find it is just like, it's just like orders of magnitude difference, right? So really snappiness of having everything in one place is probably what I would miss the most.
And of course, from a business standpoint, that's worth a lot because that's the time that your engineers are spending trying to. I mean, if it takes you 20 minutes to find a log or whatever piece of information versus 20 seconds, that's lost money, right? So yeah, that's really important.
There was a good anecdote. Like we haven't had a lot of outages like in the past year, which has been really good. But I think I had probably a speed record in debugging or like in finding out what was wrong. You know, it's like now it's almost a sixth sense where I have like a couple dashboard, couple places where I can go to debug. And I had to do one this year, which was the evening before my wedding. We had a save one outage. I was on vacation. I got paged anyway, and it took me like literally, I think 8 minutes to go in, get on the phone, pull up a couple dashboards, figure out what was wrong, and then disconnect so that I could finish my speech for my wedding. So it literally has, it has, I was very happy to have the good tooling that night.
It sounds like Datadog needs to hire you as a spokesperson. I mean, that's like the perfect story for why you want these for their product.
I don't know if you want to say like, it's like. There's probably some version of it that's a little less like workaholic, but
Let's talk. You mentioned some early on. You mentioned some of the challenges with the graphical user interface, and if the biggest selling point that you see here is just the ability to find stuff quickly.
right.
Do you see room for improvement still? I mean, I'm sure it's not perfect. Nothing ever is, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I
What are
think,
your thoughts in that area?
yeah, I mean, when I think about it, like when I think about my own challenges right now, I think that this discoverability to people, I think is like, is to someone who's never done it, it's like, that's the downside. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of things you can do. uh, it's kind of left to me as like the member of the team there to like teach everyone about it, right? I wish there was a way where I could like, hey, here's your login, here's a sort of onboarding experience. I would tell you what's important, what matters, and how do you go? There's a lot of features, right? When you think about it, that is a lot to that is like each of those platforms. I mean, CloudWatch in the first place. So there's a lot to learn, and I think that still has this challenge of like being extremely powerful. But if I think about, if you had shown me this like 8 years ago, I would probably have run away, like overwhelmed by the amount of options, right? So I think there's still a challenge there to find the right balance between someone who comes in, and also like sometimes I like to send you know like a product manager ask me like, hey, how do we know that who's using this feature? And the challenge gets even bigger when you start bringing, if you want to start bringing, quote unquote, non-technical people to it, right? I assume it's even more overwhelming when you start with it, right? So this onboarding question is like, how do you deal with non-power user the same way you deal with the power users? I think is a challenge, for these platforms, at least in my opinion.
I haven't used Datadog for years, and so I'm sure they've changed drastically since I last used them. It's probably been 5 or 6 years at least since I last used them. Um, do they export like a management dashboard, like or make it easy for you to show management, like here's our website visits or whatever, and the website's up now or it's down now?
Yeah. I mean, you can, it's very powerful, so you can create pretty much every dashboard, every dashboard you want to. But I think it's still left to you to figure out what is, you know, what management should pay attention to, which makes sense, right? I think there's so much variety and like applications. It's like if it's just like just average latency, and you have like 50 services, it doesn't really matter. But I think I haven't used too many like other application recently as well. But I think the challenge we're facing is like those platforms has no idea like by default what the business metric is, right? They get the latency of like every service, they don't know which ones are mission critical or not. So I think like that editorial part is still left up to you to like figure out, okay, like I'm gonna create this high level dashboard. So you can definitely create the dashboard. It's up to you to like figure out what your management might care about and what you should show them.
So what metrics do you track right now? Let's start at the highest level. Like what would you show to your CEO or to the board of directors right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, these days it's like, number of outages and like errors. As I mentioned, like it's a fairly simple, at least from the outside. It's like, is the API, are the website and API up or down? And how many failed requests do we have? I think we care decently about latency, right? So just looking at latency of like the main API endpoints and making sure they perform. Like the thing that I've liked as well is like it's even like I'm not looking like whenever you can do there is like look at the internal latency. What I like is that we have a synthetics test set up, right? So the API and the dashboard being tested from the outside. That's kind of my go-to, because like I've made the mistake myself in the past of like, hey, look, all my internal monitoring is working. The app is responding, and then you have an error that's like external to it, like either or not even errors, right? Your server is in Oregon and your customers in the UK get, a 250 milliseconds penalty just from, distance and the speed of light, and that's not visible, right? And so showing something that's more like external with like synthetics test is like a better way. It's like, hey, this is how this responds to actual users. And look, like it's not me like doctoring the test. This is literally something simulating a user, and this is what they see. I think to me that's the useful thing I show to like external stakeholders. It's like, hey, look, like someone in London gets an 800 milliseconds response, or and I'm not making this up. This is not like it works on my machine type scenario. External visibility is good. It's like, hey, look, this is the uptime. We have it plugged into like an external status page. So that's always super helpful as well, so that we know that, like I think what I would say there is like the word there. It's actually something like very important there if you want to try to sell your stakeholders on observability, is making sure that that you understand their point of view in terms of what matters to them might not be what matters to you, right? You might be interesting and like, oh, like this is how the traffic is like spread between my Kubernetes pods or whatever, and they're like, well, is this up for users, right? Or is this accessible from everywhere? You don't want to have like you can have the same problem when with software testing, right? It's like, well, like I have 99% unit test coverage, and your thing still doesn't do the work, right? So I think it's important to have those different layers, and I think when you sell it to your stakeholders, you want to make you always want to. It's like internal team productivity is important, but you don't want to fall in the trap where all you're measuring is what matters to you, and you want to keep track of like of what's the state of things for the end users, right? You don't want to look for your keys under the lights. You want to look for your keys where you lost them, right?
Have you had any horror stories trying to implement observability, or any mistakes that you wished you had known better?
It's a good question. I think there's been a trend in the past 5 years of letting you send pretty much whatever you want and then set limits on it. But I'm pretty sure you can do pretty bad mistakes if you don't set any limits on how much things you ingest or how many, billing limits, because it's a very cloud in 2022 things. It's like, let's you set up everything and then send you the bill. And I'm pretty sure you can make some pretty horrible mistakes there, right? If you have like a Datadog in particular, you get charged by the number of instances who are running the agent. Let's say you have a runaway auto-scaling process. Your bill's gonna be probably a lot a lot bigger than you'd like, right? Same with logging and stuff. So I tend to start and try to put some, like, especially on logging and things, like set some conservative, some conservative limits so that I don't, it's not a blank check to the observability company. I can't think of, but I can't, aside from that, like runaway billing, I can't really think of, it can get expensive. That's another thing. I think if you like the drawback of having everything in one place is like it's a little bit like the cloud platforms. It makes you a very good job of like, oh, I want to add this one more thing to measure because it's there, right? Why wouldn't I want observability in that? And it can balloon a little bit. Like I have to say that there's a couple of things that I enabled first. I'm like, I don't need that right now. I don't need to pay, right? It's like I think Datadog, you're like the oldest you can get, like we use Ruby on Rails, right? So you can get like Ruby level, what's the word? Tracing, not even tracing, but like you can get like code level performance traces, and that is not a problem for us right now. We're not at the point, we optimize like API requests. We don't optimize like code level memory allocation. So paying for tracing for that, if it's something that you look at once every 9 months, do you really need to pay for that peace of mind? So I think that, the billing there, I think the challenge like with everything DevOps is as well as like optimizing it for the sake of optimizing it, right? Where you just like you have this like perfect observability system and then you're, no one's using your application. So you don't want to make that
Yeah.
mistake. You don't want like that's probably the biggest mistake everyone makes. I don't think there's too many foot guns, honestly. Like the most likely outcome is like you don't really get good adoption or people don't use it. You want to avoid runaway billing, but it's not. I don't think you can make any crazy mistakes. Crazy mistakes there. Maybe like I might be wrong. Like if someone has some really horrible horror stories, but yeah, I think those things are well optimized as well. I haven't seen any like performance impact of doing this. I think like that seems like a solved problem, and like the memory footprint of having agents or tracing. I think there's a lot of effort that's been spent by both companies to make sure that that observing doesn't affect the performance of what you're observing too much.
Is there any advice you could give to somebody who's getting ready to embark on this journey of implementing observability? How should they start? Should they just use a tool? Which tool, if you want to make a recommendation? Should they start in one specific area with logging or with tracing or with, how do you start? I know that's a big question.
That's a great question. I mean, I would definitely do it earlier than not, like especially if you have nothing. I think it's worth like I'm obviously like if I wasn't clear, I'm a big Datadog user, and I would happily recommend it. But I'm sure like competing platforms have the same thing. I would give it a try, right? I think it's one of those where it's still the experience of getting that full view and the snappy UI with everything in one place is like an order of magnitude more than what's offered by default by the cloud platform. So I would like give it a shot, and like if you're like me, you probably won't go back. um, I would get started early. I think, as you build a team, it's one of those things that's like if everyone builds the right reflexes, like CI/CD, it's almost becoming like CI/CD in my opinion. Like it's table stakes. You set it up early, you set the right basis, your entire team knows what to do, how to use it. And it's just gonna make everyone more productive. Honestly, aside from like the only downside I see is like cost. I don't spend very much time optimizing it or changing it. You just want to keep your cost, just want to keep your cost in touch, especially if you're like, a small company with not too many resources. You don't want to overspend on top of your AWS thing. But I think getting started is probably the most important. I think as I mentioned, I would look to have, if you're already using something like Terraform, I would look, the maybe like little less obvious advice is to look like from the get-go, like which part of your setup you wanna use infrastructure as code for. So the very obvious one is like if you have an install agent, I mean, in this day and age, it's like, no, you probably don't install anything manually on a server anyway, but you want to make sure that at least all the agents are part of however you deploy the software, right? So it's like a sidecar or anything. It should probably be part of your Terraform CloudFormation setup. If you're not using it, that's a completely different topic, but I do strongly recommend infrastructure as code if you're getting started. But make sure it's good. But I would even push it like one more level. If you start setting business critical monitors and thing, you can, in the case of Datadog, you can script those with Terraform. If Terraform or whatever is not available for the stack, you can probably look at ways where you can write a tiny script that use the API to like make sure the alert is created. Like for business critical thing, I think that's super important because those, click and set up things can be finicky. You can delete things by mistake, and then one day your mission critical alerts is not there or is not monitoring what you expected to monitor. So maybe if there's one non-obvious advice there is like look at scripting your very critical part of observability.
Good advice. Yes, great. Is there anything that I or our audience should ask you that I haven't yet?
No, but I think we've done quite around. We've gone quite around the loop there. I think I'm realizing that most of what I have to say is like the technical challenge is obviously only a small part of the thing, right? It's like if it's probably a joke there about like if a tree falls in the forest, it's recording on your observability platform, but no one looks at it. Did it really make a sound? So you want to make sure that people know how to use it, and you're not like it's not the domain of one expert who knows where to look at. I think like democratizing and shifting that left in your company is probably going to take you more time than all the rest combined, but it's probably where where a lot of the benefit is, right? It's like making sure that everyone knows how to debug their own application. I mean, it's the extension of like the DevOps, the DevOps ethos, right? It's like you want to make sure like it's not the domain of like one person, but everyone cares about it. Everyone knows how to monitor the application. So think about like if you're going to implement it, are you going to teach people how to use it? Are you going to make sure that it's part of the quiver of tools that every developer on your team is going to be able to use? It's like probably underinvested when you think about it as an engineer, but it ends up being very critical. So,
well, Paul, if people are interested in reaching out, if they have questions after listening, are you available for contact? How can I get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a Twitter account that I use mostly for reading. I don't post very much anything, but I can be contacted on there. It's Paul Cothenet or Cothenet, my last name. That's pretty much it. Or you can find me on GitHub, same place. It's probably my contact information in there. So feel free to reach out if one call I make if you're interested. Like I made the shift from my company to the current one. Was essentially to work on as a software engineer on the climate problems that we are facing. So if you're interested in making that transition, I'm also very happy to talk about the topic.
Do you have any openings right now, or do you?
Yeah, we have a lot of openings for software engineers, distributed in the US for now, so US time zones, but any locations in the US.
And what URL if people are interested in looking for that?
That would be patch.io. Very simple. Not patch.com. That's an old social network thing, but patch.io.
Okay. Simple to remember.
Exactly.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story. I hope that some of our listeners are inspired to take on the challenge and the reward of observability after doing this.
I wish you. And again, like any questions or any tips, feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. Thanks. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you very much.